On my first night at Kulak Inlet Regional, my name appeared in the operations log for a plane that never existed. I didn't write it. I didn't even know where the pen was kept yet. But after midnight, while I was walking the terminal to memorize the alarm panels and fire pull stations like the chief asked me to, the radio coughed out a calcin, the printer in ops stuttered, and by the time I got back to the desk, there it was in the logbook: 017, freight 265, cargo, stop, go, RWY 13, ops LeMay. It should have been boring. That's the appeal of airports this far north. Plenty of time to think between little bursts of fuel slips, runway condition reports, and coffee. Kulak Inlet isn't Anchorage. It isn't even Bethel. We're 4 hours by road from the nearest real grocery store to buy air if the ceiling is kind. Winter is 6 months long even when the calendar lies. The runway is 6,500 feet of grooved asphalt pointing northwest, southeast 13/31, with poppy on the 31 end and a dent where a DC-38, a snow berm in 1978. There's a single-story terminal with 2 gates that mostly handle turboprops, an FBO that smells like hot dust and diesel, and stale coffee, a maintenance hangar, a fuel farm, and the ops shack, which is a counter in a room that used to be a gift shop, selling carved soapstone seals and postcards of sunsets. My title on paper was Operations Agent 3. In practice, that meant I was the night guy. I did runway inspections, kept the logs straight, reset tripped circuit breakers, babysat the ARF truck if the others took the plow out, and made sure the lights stayed on. The duty phone went to me, medevac on final at 2 a.m. That's me. Moose wandering onto the approach path, me and an air horn, a drunk guy asleep in the secure area. Coffee, patience, and a call to the village safety officer. I'd been hired that week off a video interview from a studio apartment in Fairbanks that cost too much. I'm not from here. My CV said EMTB certification, 3 years on an ambulance, a few seasons on a hotshot crew, and 1 year in a dispatch center. I try not to think about. What the CV didn't say was that I wanted quiet with solid walls and known rules. Fire, sirens, screaming. My hands had started shaking every time the tones dropped. Airports have rules. They have checklists. They have friction on the runway and numbers you can touch. Read the ops manual, the airport manager had told me. And this, it had duct tape on the spine with ops night irregularities, handwritten in block letters. Someone had glued a photo of the rotating beacon to the front. Is that official? I asked. The manager, a woman in her 50s, with gray hair in a braid and a Carhartt jacket that could take a knife, smiled without showing her teeth. Officially unofficial. Most of it's folk nonsense we keep because the old-timers like to see it there. But there are a few things we do because we've had incidents. Rose started it. You've got her shift. Rose, you'll see her notes. Then she left at 6:55 p.m. with the 2-day agents and said over her shoulder, log anything you can't explain, even if it's nothing, especially if it's nothing. It was November. The sun had set at 4, skimming the water like a coin, and then dropping. By 9, the wind had dropped. By 10, the AWAS was calling it clear and cold. Wind from O to O at 3, temperature -18°C, altimeter 29.76. The beacon turned red-white, endless. A snowcat idled in a drift between the hangar and the fence with a faded number 3 on its flank, steam clumping in the cold. Somewhere a diesel generator growled. By midnight, I'd done a light check, filed the 2100Z runway condition, report dry and cold, with patches of black ice at the 31 threshold. And I was on my second cup of bad coffee, reading the blue binder. The first page had a cartoon moose drawn in the corner. The first rule was typed. The rest were in a dozen different hands and inks. The rotating beacon will keep time to the second. If the beacon stop lags at the top of the hour for 3 rotations, that is field state 4. Cover the windows with the blackout panels and wait 5 minutes. Do not look outside. Do not open either door. Below that, in pencil, don't argue with this. We lost Bobby by arguing. If you hear your own voice on CTAF or Unicom, it will be delayed by between 7 and 2.4 seconds. Do not respond to it. Restrict transmit to Kulak radio, standby. Turn off the desk lamp. Wait, it will repeat you twice, and then it will ask a question. Do not answer the question. When it stops, write the exact timestamp and what it said. Freight 265 is a Tuesday-Thursday only. Do not put the lights up for its calls on other days. Do not challenge it. Do not say negative. If you must transmit, use your last name only and say stand by. It will not land if you say stand by. Eli drives plow 2. If Eli asks for a gate after 2:30, do not open Fox Gate. Eli knows this. If he insists, ask him what his wife calls him. He will not answer because Eli died February 2022. If you hear chains, it is not the plow. The poppy on 31 will lead all eyes home. If it shows for white when you're at rest, log field state 5 and go kill the circuit at the panel, then restart after 1 minute. If it still shows for white, you are not resting. Make sure you're breathing. Count backward from 100 by 7s and look at your fingertips. AWOS, adding wind songs is not a fault. Do not power cycle. AWOS. You will think about power cycling. Don't. The Gates, Polar Maine, Fox Maintenance, Dry Creek Perimeter, East. Do not open Fox after 2:30. Do not open Dry Creek after 1:13. Do not close Polar if it is already open. If a child knocks on the terminal glass and asks for water, be polite. Say no. Drink water yourself in front of them. Go to the bathroom and run the sink. Close the bathroom door. Wait. If a medevac calls you buddy more than twice in one transmission, that is not a medevac. Ask them to state the patient's birthday twice. If the birthdays match, it might be a medevac. If they don't, it is exactly what it is. Marlowe, the cat. If Marlowe stares at the basement door and thumps his tail, get the wedge from the top drawer and slide it under hard. Check the hinges at 110. Then, in blue ink, you'll see countersigns in other rules, patterns. Don't assume any rule is always true. Sometimes we invert. That's why we keep the log. I was halfway down the second page, which looked like a list of field states with cryptic, short names: Snow Whistle, Mirror, Double Glass when the radio whispered, KTAF Unicom, 122.8, lives in your bones. The waterfall hiss is constant, but this wasn't hiss. It was my own throat clearing, a sound recorded and played back with a fraction of a second of lag. As if the room had become a tin can with a string. Kulak radio, I heard, and I jerked because that was my voice. Kulak radio, say again, last calcine. I hadn't said anything. I swiveled in my chair away from the window and put my fingers under the desk and found the desk lamp switch and flicked it off. The room didn't change much, because the overheads were still on, but I felt invisible, and that felt better. Kulak radio, stand by. I said to no one, calmly like the dispatch center had drilled into me. Events are calmer when you say they are. Then I didn't transmit again. The catheter hiss of the radio filled the spaces between the words. My voice again, a little too bright. Kulak radio copies. We've got a Freighton final. Confirm runway lights on high. I did not speak. My mouth was dry. The manual's paper was slick under my fingers. Kulak radio, my voice asked. LeMay, you there? The rule said it would ask a question. I didn't answer. I counted silently to 60 and then to 60 again. The clock on the wall ticked so loud it seemed sarcastic. The radio hissed. After a little while, I felt the air in the room shift the way it does when someone steps close to a door that you can't see but can hear. I looked at Marlowe, the airport cat, an old gray Tom with a half-severed ear who lived in the ops room because he bit children and yet was beloved. Marlowe was asleep on the radiator with his fat face squashed. He did not move. You're not breathing, my voice said. Breathe. I wrote the time down. 0 hours, 7 minutes, and 14 seconds. Echo on CTAF. Breathe. The capital B felt like someone else's hand at 0:13. The beacon did a hitch at the top of its circle. I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't just read Rule 1. The rotating beacon is a lazy metronome. Red, white, sweeping the snow berms so they look like waves. It does not pause. When it ticked and stuttered and the red stuck, my hands moved by themselves. I pulled the blackout panels from behind the filing cabinet and let them slap down over the windows. The buckle straps had been cut off a long time ago, so the panels could be dropped fast. The room changed around me. The sound of the beacon felt like light that couldn't get in, like bees bumping at a jar. I was stupid. I reached up and pulled one corner back with 2 fingers because my brain had a set of instincts, honed by a lifetime of seeing things, and I wanted to see. The whole runway was an absence. The beacon had never existed. There was a greenish light where the poppy should be that wasn't. Any poppy color, and in it was a shape the size of a small building that had 1,000 panes like scales, and the panes all showed the terminal from a slightly wrong angle like a fly seeing a place it ate often, and all of that happened between one heartbeat and the next. And then I dropped the panel and stepped back. A tiny hysterical wheeze that sounded like a cough. My throat burned with shame. My hands smelled like cold. I counted to 300. I watched the second hand crawl. At 0:19, the radio said, Kulak radio, freight 265, 10 miles straighten. Runway 13, lights on high, poppy for white, request stop and go. My fingers knew buttons. I wore the headset like a crown I had earned. Kulak radio, I said, and heard my voice scrape like a match in my own head. Stand by, nothing else. The word came out like an apology. Stand by, Roger, a voice said. And then a strange sort of smile in the syllables, a bright, cheery, wrong pitch that reminded me of voicemail playback at 1.2x. I did not put the lights up. They were on medium, 3 clicks, which was plenty for black sky and dry air. The blue binder had Rule 3 in bigger handwriting than the others, the ink pressed deep. It had a yellow sticky beside it, in Rose's hand, because I knew it was Rose. I knew her from the way a person who cares too much sometimes lets their letters lean like they are going to fall. It said, "It can only step where you make a step. Don't make it a step at 022. The Epson dot matrix printer on the shelf behind me stuttered awake and started coughing out paper. It printed the line that would be in the log when I got back from my walk. 017. Freight 265. Stop. Go. RWY 13. OPS. Lemme. I stood there and watched it type my name. In that second, the room didn't feel cold. In that second, the old dispatch center discovered itself in my spine again, and the urge to smash the printer with a coffee mug rose so sharp I had to set my hands on the counter and spread my fingers and feel the laminate. I wrote in the log. In the notes column, no movement, no ELT, no engine noise, no wheels on tarmac. Lights, medium, standby, given, printer-generated unconfirmed movement. I initialed it. I put a line under it. The runway beyond the blackout panels was just runway again when I finally lifted the corner. The beacon was lazy. The poppy on 31 was too white. Although the runway I'd be using if I were the pilot was 13, the EWAS sang the weather again. That cheerful monotone like a friend having a stroke. Just after midnight, the phone rang. It was the hospital. "We may have a medevac tonight," the nurse said. "Hypothermia, fisherman, dropped through the river ice. Vitals, touch and go. Anchorage is trying to fly. They'll call." I wrote it in the medevac log. I made a space in the parking lot for an ambulance that would come at 2 in the morning with its lights off, like they do here, so they don't wake the dead. I checked the defib pads on the ARF truck, even though my job wasn't medical. It's nice to have a thing you can touch that fixes something. I thought of the fisherman lying on a table, the way skin looks when it has given up heat for too long and brings penitchit back in quick jerks that are cruel. At 103. I put on my parka and hit the runway in the pickup for the first full FOD check of the night. It was cold enough that the windshield got a skin of breath on the inside, and I had to wipe it with my sleeve. The runway lights on 13 burned that electric blue-white LED that is somehow colder than the old incandescents used to be. Each one is a point, and together they make a path for somebody to believe in. Runway checks are precise. You slow roll down the center line. Look for wildlife and debris. You eyeball the paint. You note the same pothole that keeps opening at the seam. Past the 13 numbers, because the permafrost is a heartbeat and the heartbeat doesn't care. You drive back on the parallel, checking the old dice pad for gulls. If anything is wrong, you put it in the RCR and call it in. I like that there's a right answer, even when it's bad. There was a snow lump in the skid mark at the 1,000-foot marker and a piece of blue plastic the size of a hand near the poppy housing. I stopped the truck and got out and looked up at the poppy as if it were a person. Too white, too red, the pure, exact thing. Then I looked at it longer and realized that the leftmost light was just off-white, a little olive, and the hair on my arms came up in the cold, and I told myself that lead temperatures vary, that my eyes were playing games, that the AWOS was whispering numbers in my ear because I'd left the truck radio loud, that the smell of diesel from the plow shed was simply diesel and not a place you might drown in. After I cleared the plastic and the snow lump, I tucked the truck onto the parallel and let the engine idle. The sky was a clean ache. There's a different sound to silence out here after midnight, like when the ocean sleeps. I could hear the beacon motor turning if I held still. I could hear the heating elements in the runway sign near me. I could hear what I thought was chain clink in the distance and didn't move. Because I remembered Rule 4 and the way you don't open Foxgate after 2:30. And I told myself it was 1:10 and fine. Eli had an easy voice, like a man who knew how to talk to angry snow in March. I hadn't met him, but I knew his name because the hangar had a calendar with his face on it, smiling in front of the plow. A black hat pulled down over wisps of hair, a face with a heart attack's touch. February 2022 was circled. I had touched the circle by accident and then wanted to wash my hands. Kulak Ops. Request Foxgate. I did not answer. Chains? If you hear chains, it is not the plow. Kulak Ops. Wake up. I got drifts at the NDB road. Need to cut through. Foxgate. You sleeping, or do I get the FBO kid? Every word had a crispness I did not like. People at night up here say when they're tired. They breathe and you can hear it. They forget their mic is hot while they stretch. Eli didn't on the radio twice in his life. Someone had written on Rule 4 in green pen. It's weird what a person who's been dead 3 winters now will teach you about cadence. I said nothing. I looked at my phone and saw the time was 1:12. I looked at the rules. Do not open Dry Creek after 1:13, it said, which was the perimeter gate to the east, not Fox. It felt like the rules were reading me while I read them. Moving in my hands, LeMay, Eli said across the night, and I let the handset sit in its cradle like a hot coal. Nora calls me. He stopped. The hiss swelled. I rolled the truck forward a foot, as if the thing that needed to be fixed was the way it bumped where it had been idling. The chain sound went away as if someone had been waiting near the fence and walked backward into snow. It's a long winter. The mind goes weird shapes in the dark. You anchor it with tasks, with the click of the runway light panel, with the fuel slip you reconcile to the penny, with the fire extinguisher you check for seal and needle. Every page in the blue binder is someone's small anchor written in a night like this. That's how I thought of it then, how I think of it still. At 1:19, the AWAS did a thing that wasn't in the rules. It sighed. The synthesized voice said, temperature -19er, dew point -22, wind 0 to 0 at 3, visibility 10, and then it added a tone beneath the words that was not the usual generator hum. It sounded like someone ran a wet finger around the rim of a wine glass. I listened to it build until it was a pressure in the sinuses, like diving. I wrote down, added tone. I put the manual next to me on the passenger seat and patted it once, like a superstitious old lady patting her purse in church at 1:40. I did the terminal walk. The glass had been cleaned that day and reflected me back like a stranger I would punch if he moved first. The vending machines hummed near gate 2. The bathroom smelled exactly like all airports. Some things are federal, even when they aren't. I checked the exit signs. I made a note on the work order board because a hinge on the closet door near security was squealing. And that's the kind of thing that drives the manager crazy when she's already mad because of a broken jetway belt. Marlowe followed me like a dog and then stopped where the carpet meets the linoleum near the old gift shop. His back went up. His fur looked like frost. He stared at the basement door. There's a basement under this place where the old baggage belt goes, down into a gray room with pipes like ribs and a smell like old sea. It's where the water shutoff is. We store extra chairs down there and a crate of Christmas decorations that were tacky even in the 80s. Marlowe thumped his tail twice. I went back to the ops counter and got the wooden wedge from the top drawer. I slid it under the basement door like a man who has always wedged that door, who does not say to himself that doors do not need wedges. The hinges ticked once, a settling sound that wasn't at 156. Someone knocked on the terminal glass. It was a sound so normal it hurt. 3 knuckles, polite. I looked up and saw a kid in a winter coat, too big for him, hood up, the fur rim making his face look smaller than it already was. He had frost on his eyebrows and cheeks like glitter. He made a little wave, like he'd been taught not to scare people. He said something I couldn't hear, and then put his mouth near the glass and said it again. Water. Sorry, kid, I said aloud. My mouth moved in a way that felt like a lie. He put his hands against the glass like a cat. I picked up my thermos and took a long drink, and then I went to the bathroom and turned the sink on and let it run where he could see the light move under the door. And then I shut the door to the bathroom and waited while the faucet filled the night with the idea of a river. When I came out, the kid was gone. He left nothing. No footprints in the powder at the door. No breath fog on the glass. But as I stood there, Marlowe's shadow grew long beside me, like someone found the dimmer switch to the world and gave it a twist. I looked up. The beacon had stopped. The panel said it was still on. The rulebook said nothing about the beacon stopping for good. The AWAS stopped singing and left only the wineglass keen dot. At 2:10, the hospital called again. The fisherman was worse. The medevac would try to come. They were on a turnaround from Dillingham. The line clicked as if someone else had hung up. I wrote it all down. I felt the call in my bones, like you will sometimes. How there is urgency that isn't yours but borrows your muscles anyway. At 2:23, a voice that was the easiest thing in the world said, Kulak Radio, Airlift 53, King Air from Anchorage. Inbound from the south-northeast, 25 out, patient hypothermic. Request runway 31, lights high, surface winds, please. It did not call me buddy. It did not breathe in the wrong places. It had the tired of a crew that had been in the air too long and was thinking about a hot sandwich. Every hair I had wanted to give it the world. Copy, Airlift 53, I said. Runway 31, winds 0 to 0 at 3, altimeter 2976. Lights on medium currently. PAPI green, and I stopped. I took a breath. Poppy normal. Copy normal, they said. And I wanted to cry with how beautiful the word normal was in that moment. We'll take medium. Throttle back. Burn slow. We're heavy, and the air's thin tonight. Kulak Radio, standing by, I said, because I loved the taste of correct in my mouth. Then I thumbed the light panel and hit high. The runway went from path to proclamation Kulak Radio. Another voice said almost joyfully on top of theirs, frequency bleeding like a cut. Airlift 5330 out, patient hypothermic, runway 31, lights high. I froze, hand on the switch. My breath made the window fog between the blackout panel and the glass. The printers both chuffed at the same time, like something in the circuit had decided to be an orchestra. The second voice didn't have the tired. It had a crispness that a person wouldn't, because we wobble when we're alive. It was a near-perfect copy of the words I needed, like a photocopier warming up. Airlift 5-3, I said, forcing my voice low. Confirm patient birthday, rule 9. Ask twice, too, it said. If the birthdays match, it might be a medevac. December 19, said the first voice. I waited, the second voice said, in the same syllables, like a rhyme. December 19, it felt like someone had handed me a bag of coins that jangled right. And then they handed me the same bag, and it jangled right again, and all I had to do was count them and see if one was a bent nail, and I couldn't count through my own breath. Repeat the birthday, I said. I pictured a man in a fluorescent-lit room trying to swell a fading body back to the surface of the world with warm saline and hope. December 19, they both said, one fraction of a second behind the other, like a shadow that couldn't quite get the rhythm. You copy 2 transmissions, the first voice said, human discomfort creeping around its edges. Airlift, that sounded like, and the rest was lost in static, as if the air itself had decided to scratch the message on the way to me. I looked down at the panel where the runway light intensity sits like a medium, high, with an extra button to wigwag the strobes for an alert. A yellow sticky note beside it in Rose's hand said 313, then off, then on. We didn't have pilot-controlled lighting out here. You couldn't click the mic to bring it up, but if you posted the pattern, a crew you trusted could say it back, and you could say yes. We had used 313 twice last winter, the log said. The copy never answered it. It didn't know what human forgets on purpose looks like. Airlift 5-3, I said, and I felt the room change the way rooms do when you say your own name. Watch for a runway light test. Confirm receipt. I clicked high 3 times, paused so that the pause felt like a heartbeat, low once, pause, high 3. Then I killed the lights for 2 seconds that lasted a week in my mind and then brought them up on medium again like a sunrise. Copy 313. The first voice said, steady. The second said nothing. I breathed. Copy, I said. You're seeing 2 returns, the first asked. Lower now. Pilot brain doing what it does and tallying the risk. We're showing a second beacon on the inlet. Is that you? We have 1 beacon. It sits on a tower above the FBO, like an old man humming to himself. It had stopped for me. But now, in the corner of my eye, under the panel, a soft green lit up for the radar feed the FBO kid keeps beside the ops desk. AADSB aggregator, like all the kids use. And there were 2 diamonds on it where there should be 1. 1 from the south-northeast. 1 from the north-northwest over water, where only ice lives after October, and it does not live well. One of them didn't squawk. One of them had a tail number that came up as NA. The sensible thing would have been to shut it all down and tell the sky no. The stupid thing would have been to trust the copy because it knows the birthdays. I see it, I said. We'll keep lights medium until short final. I set it to the right one. I hoped. My tongue felt like the wrong size. Something banged behind me at the basement door. The wedge shifted. Marlowe hissed under his breath, the way cats hiss when they are too tired to throw a full fit. I had never felt so strongly that every choice I had made in the last 10 years had conspired to bring me to a door in a tiny airport. To hold my hand against it while a medevac asked me to be exact and something in the hinge asked me to make a mistake. Kulak Ops. Plow to Eli said on the radio, as if he'd been chatting with someone else this whole time and just turned back to me. Gonna need Foxgate now. We got Spindrift burying the center line out past the 1,000-footer. You want to keep your runway open. It's not Spindrift, I murmured to myself. It's not anything. Foxgate is shut, Eli said, polite, with a smile that put smoke in the world. You step or not. You think the fisherman's warm breath is enough to thaw your floors without a landing tonight? Marlowe looked at me and thumped his tail twice. He looked at the wedge and then at me. I took the wedge and kicked it harder under the door with my boot heel, and I imagined hands on the other side that were touched by a cold that was not the same as this winter, tugging, and a second pair of hands that knew my hands were stupid. Negative Foxgate, I said, and then realized what I had said and felt my own stomach drop to my shoes like the elevator game, because the rule said don't say negative, and the need to say negative had bubbled out of me like it belonged. My skin felt too tight. Stand by, I amended, choking on it. He laughed. It was such a kind man's laugh. I held the radio away from my ear until it was a sound in the room and not a sound in me. At 2:31, the light over the door to the tarmac flickered. The security maglock clicked. The monitor the TSA uses in the day to stream footage when they feel like watching me drink coffee in the empty terminal lit up and showed Gate 1's camera in grain. The door handle trembled hard enough to rattle. In the grain, the glass looked like water. Buddy, a voice said from outside the glass, muffled by a foot of air and a wall, and whatever else was there. Buddy, you forgot to put the gate wedge on the county side. Come on, man, open up. We got a guy dying. We can't circle. I closed my eyes. He'd said buddy once. The rule said 2 times. What kills you is not the ghost. It's the compromise you let in because you have a good heart and you want clocks to work. Airlift 5-3, I said into the mic. Report distance 17 out, the first voice said. The second stayed cool at 22, trailing slightly like it was counting stars, and the stars kept moving on it. At 2:37, the AWOS said, wind calm, in a voice that was fine and normal. And when it said temperature, it said -60, and the warmth in my bones vanished that second like someone pulled a plug. 60 below is a lethal thing. We weren't there. We couldn't be. But my breath didn't fog. The air in my nose hurt like too much snow in summer, not like cold. The AWOS tone was louder. The wine glass song, now a hum that had overtones like bees. I imagined glass vibrating off racks in the FBO, making a rain no one would enjoy. Something inside me wanted to power cycle the AWOS just to feel a switch click, to prove that plastic exists and does what it should. Rule 6, do not power cycle AWOS. I put both hands under my thighs and sat on them and watched the door handle twitch. Then came the child's voice. Water. From the glass again, a whisper. My mouth flooded because the body is a traitor. I thought of Rose. I had never met her, but I could see her in the handwriting. She wrote like she had saved lives she didn't get to keep. She had underlined things like she knew someone like me would think he was special enough not to need to read it twice. On the next page, in red ink, there was something I hadn't gotten to yet, because I hadn't gotten to it It felt like my fault that it wasn't in my head. I turned pages with fingers that didn't want to work and found it. If Rule 3 fails and Rule 4 conflicts with Rule 9, invert Rule 1. You don't want to. That's the point. I stared at it. Inverting Rule 1 meant do look outside when the beacon stuttered. Don't put the blackout panels down. Don't hide. I hated that idea with a bone-deep stubbornness that felt like stubbornness was a place, and I had built a house there. The beacon ticked. I hadn't seen it, but I felt it in the room, in the way the fluorescent lights vibrated. I peeled the blackout panel back like a child peeking, threw a blanket and looked straight at the night. Over the water to the north-northwest, a second beacon turned. It was too low. It was too slow. Its red was wrong. It was a shade a printer would make if it was running out of ink. And as it turned, it showed me a plane on final that wasn't on final, that was parallel to the runway, that was huge and small and exact and wrong. Where its landing lights should have been were points that looked like eyes. I didn't see a fuselage. I saw frames. It was like looking through scaffolding at the idea of a thing. When it turned its attention, I understood that attention can be a physical force in the body, a push that asks for obedience in the south-southeast. A pair of landing lights approached in a line, higher, cautious, the way a crew behaves when they didn't get the ceiling they were promised. That was human. The thing to the north-northwest wasn't lined up with anything we own and didn't care. It pivoted in the sky, and suddenly it wasn't over water anymore. It was over the far end of 31, like it had slid across a glass in a spill. Airlift 5-3, I said, and my voice was so quiet the microphone probably didn't catch it. Say runway 31, they said, both at once. And the second voice was wrong now because it had waited too little time. If I put the lights too high, I made a step. If I killed them, we all might as well go home. Inverting Rule 1 felt like letting an intruder look at me. The medevac had a human on it who was flying a plane in air you could chew, and they were coming because of me. I looked at the panel. The sticky note said 313. I grabbed the little metal toggle for the poppy circuit and pulled it down, killing it. The air outside changed shade. The runway went from believable to blank. I slammed the Arctic cheap version of an in-house control, like the FBO kid rigged in to a pattern. High, pause, low. Pause, high, 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 then off for a 2 count that broke my brain, and then back on to medium. The copy over the water didn't blink. It moved as if the world were a tabletop, and someone had tilted it. The lights caught it, like a camera flash catches a window with nothing behind it, only my own small face. The right voice said, copy, pattern. The wrong voice said something like, open the gate, in my aunt's voice that I hadn't heard in 20 years, and then coughed, static, short, final. The human voice said, I saw the landing lights drop into the black like someone going underwater on purpose. I put my hand on the crash phone and stared at the runway pavement, at the numbers 31, big as a bedroom floor, at the little frost devils picking up off the shoulders. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I was outside or in. My hands were colder than the air. Runway lights, medium, I said to no one on the radio because my mouth needed words or it would eat itself. The thing at the north end flexed. The beacon to the north flared and died. A greenish smear moved on the snow like light behind the world. The sound in the room deepened until my molars felt loose. The basement door thumped, and the wedge creaked like a touch scream that doesn't believe in throats. The plane came out of the black and touched down so soft it felt like I had imagined it. Wheels kissed, the reverse pitched a breath. Snow lifted and fell. For a second, the landing lights dazzled the camera like a lie told beautifully. The human voice said, "Down." And someone laughed out loud in the back of the cabin, like a person who had run a mile with their eyes closed, and then hit grass. I remembered to breathe. The sound changed. The wrong light off the north went out like a bulb, dying in a house you don't live in anymore. The Iwos exhaled like someone had been holding it in both hands and had decided to put it down. My fingers ached where they had crushed the edge of the panel. "Back taxi and turn on A," the right voice said. Like a man who didn't know how close he had been to God and liked it that way. "Copy, Alpha," I said. The radio hissed. The printer stayed quiet. The basement door settled. Marlowe, unarched, yawned, and sat as if nothing had happened. I opened the polar gate for the ambulance. It rolled in silent, a shark with county plates. The breath of the EMT who climbed out was human and tasted of coffee and mint, and that faint smell of wool that says laundry takes patience in winter. We got the patient out of the plane on a litter, his face gray with the special gray that comes when a body has been cold too long. He was an old fisherman with a beard like a drowned man's rope. The crew's breath came in little white bursts, and his did not. We carried him across asphalt that had love in it because it had been made by men who believed in planes landing in places like this. The ambulance door closed with a hydraulic hiss. The driver gave me a two-finger salute, like we were soldiers in the same dumb war, and then drove away without siren. I stood in the gate until their taillights turned out of the lot, and then I closed Polar Dot at 3:07. I sat down at the ops desk and realized my hands were bleeding. The skin at the edges of my nails had split. I hadn't noticed. I wrote the log entries in block letters that looked so careful you could have used them to build a walkway. I wrote about 2 transmissions. I wrote about the 313. I wrote about the beacon stutter. I wrote about Eli and the laugh and how much I hated that my name was on a plane that never existed. Rose had added things over the years. She dated them. Little notes with arrows pointing at rules, like the lakes are thin this year, listen before you open. Or Marlowe knows the difference between draft and inhale. Ask him, or this terrifying one, if the glass fogs on the outside, go to the basement and sit with it, not alone. Which sounded like a lie you might need to tell yourself to do something awful. There was a page at the back in Rose's hand titled Addenda, with a star drawn next to it, the paper soft at the edges, like it had been turned 100 times. Addendum, the copy wants us generous. It wants us to be human in straight lines. If you must do wrong to do right, do it. You can wash your hands later if that helps. It does not help me. Below that, a list of names. Bobby, Eli, Iada. 2 names in a row had been scribbled out with such force the page had torn at 3:30. The phone lit up again. The hospital, the fisherman had a rhythm. They were warming him and his core temp was coming up, and maybe he wouldn't die. I looked down at my hands, at the blood I'd smeared on the margin of the log like a person with dramatic leanings, and felt the hydraulic relief of a choice paying off. At 4:02, The beacon hiccuped once more, not the 3 of Field State 4, and then resumed. The AWAS voice lost its harmony and went back to cheerful weather. Somewhere out on the east perimeter, something rattled the dry creek gate. I turned off the radio for 13 seconds and turned it back on, and there was nothing on frequency but the hiss and the universal low electricity of people sleeping in houses far from noise. 4:15, the radio said. Kulak radio, freight 265. Short final, runway 13, lights high. And I felt the whiplash of wrongness all over again because it sounded cheerful and cruel in its exactness. But I had already used the pattern. The fisherman was at the hospital. The medevac had landed. The thing had failed to land at 2:30, and now it wanted to try again when no one would be watching. "Stand by," I said, and the printer didn't print at 5 o'clock. I took the pickup down the runway one more time. The plows were asleep. The first gray of a dawn that wouldn't happen yet was beginning to put a little milk in the east. It was warmer by a degree -17 now. AWOS said, which in this place is like winning the lottery, since we never planned to spend it anyway. The skid at the 1,000-foot marker was encrusted with something that looked like glass until I kicked it, and I laughed at myself again because the body loves to lie and then scold you for catching it. I saw prints crossing the parallel, like a small deer had decided to treat the runway like a frozen river. We don't get many deer. Maybe a caribou. The prints crossed and then doubled back and then went nowhere, like a dog thrown a ball that never comes back. I got out of the truck and crouched and put my hand near one. My breath fogged and then didn't and then did. The print was deeper on one side, like the leg that made it was borrowed. I opened the blue binder to the first page, and in greasy pencil I wrote an 11th rule and hated the feeling of being the person who gets to do that because it felt like a promotion nobody wanted and everyone got eventually. If the printer logs a movement you did not see and you did not command the lights up, that movement belongs to it. Cross it out. Write yours under it. It will not like it. That's not reason to let it have it under that in smaller print. The beacon can lie by being too honest. Count aloud. Breathing is a kind of count. I signed my name next to it and the date, and I almost wrote the time, but then didn't, because hours have a way of accumulating and making a case. At 6:10, when the eastern sky had a line of red, like someone had cut the world and light was bleeding through, I took the wedge out from under the basement door and opened it and went down. It smelled like iron and old ballast and mouse. The pipes did a slow tinking because heat makes promises to cold that cold pretends to accept in March. Halfway down the steps, I heard a voice that had lived in the blue binder. It was a woman saying to someone, "Don't," in a tone that sounded like a hand on a wrist. I stopped. The lights flickered. Marlowe paused on the top step and made a sound like a question. I kept going. If there were things in the basement, they had been there before, and the water main does what it does regardless of voices. I checked the shutoff. I put my hand on the pipe. It thrummed like a heart. When I came back up, the hallway felt wider. At 6:30, the first day shift guy came in, a kid with a beard that grew like moss on a rock and a bleary look. He said, "Anything weird?" Like a joke, because the blue binder is a ritual you use to initiate new people. You don't tell them you mean it until you have to. Just the Tuesday-Thursday cargo trying a Friday, I said. Medevac had two voices. Fisherman's alive. He stopped smiling. You get Rose's book? Yeah, I tapped it with my fingers. She write like she meant it. He rubbed Marlowe, and Marlowe tolerated it with the resignation of an old man who accepts adoration because it's expected. She did. She couldn't get out from under it after her mom died, he said, and then looked like he wished he hadn't said it. She was good at this job. Where is she? He made that face people do when they want to say gone in a way that doesn't make the room smaller. She transferred. She's down in Sitka, he said, like a person lying kindly. Better weather. I nodded and let him have it. Sometimes letting someone say a nice thing that isn't true is like letting a child knock on the glass and not giving them water. You are making the world work for them one more hour at 6:58. The airport manager came in with her braid and her look that made you check your posture. She poured coffee and added 2 sugar packets because she had given something up at some point and decided sweetness would do. How was your first night? She asked. The usual, I said. Printer needs a feed. AWOS added a tone for a while. Poppy on 31 is fine, but 1 is a little olive if you stare at it long enough. I'll run a check on the housing when it's warmer. Hospital called twice. Medevac landed and gave me a new gray hair. Freight 265 tried to play games. She looked at the log like a person reading a story that ends the same way every time. Good engraving on the log, she said. You've got a dispatcher hand. I didn't answer that. She flipped the blue binder idly and saw the rule I had added and nodded once. That's a good one. We didn't have that written clean. She said it the way a person says, you saw what I saw, and it made me feel less like a needle wobbling out of a speedometer. Anything else? She asked. Marlowe flicked his tail and looked at the basement door. The wedge sat on the counter. The beacon turned lazy again, slow enough that we could both predict it without being right. I looked at the printer and at the strip where my name had been typed by something that wasn't my hands, and then crossed out by my hands. I think Field State 4 has a new variation, I said. If we power cycle AWOS when it's singing, does it open doors, or does it only open windows? The rule says don't, but we should make a note. And if we get to airlifts again, we need a second pattern beyond 313. The copy learns. She sipped coffee and smiled without showing her teeth. Rose used to say that what we get above all is an echo with good intuition, she said. Write it up. Put it in the addenda. You make the rules by living with them. I picked up the pen. I wrote in block letters so precise I could have used them to line a runway. I wrote, the echo learns patterns. Rotate authentication patterns. Use human tells. No one alive says the same sentence exactly the same way twice. The day agent put his coat on the back of the chair by the desk, like he was going to own this place for 8 hours. The manager clapped me on the shoulder with a hand that had carried a dead thing once and remembered. Sleep, she said, and I realized that my bones had all been replaced with something that sighed at the idea. I went out the sliding doors, and the cold hit me with a shock that felt like a new rule. The river to the north was a paved road of ice. The sun was somewhere behind the horizon, smoking. From the parking lot, I could see the far end of 31 and a smear on the snow there like a hand had been pressed into the world and heated it for a moment. A raven stepped along the fence and looked at me, and then at the sky, and then at me again, and said nothing, like everything that birth and airports and rules say without words. When I turned the engine over, the radio I carry in my pocket for the lot crackled once. A quiet little clearing of a throat. You forgot something. I clicked it off. I drove past the Dry Creek Gate and did not look at it. I drove past the Fox Gate and did not open it. I drove past the Beacon Tower and did not count. The light blinked red-white, old and dear. The road into town was corduroy, and it made the truck vibrate until it felt like a voice in a different language telling a story I would have to learn to hear. The blue binder sat on the seat beside me like a cat that sits on your lap when you are reading grief. I slept 5 hours and woke to a message from the hospital that the fisherman had warmed. He had asked for coffee. He had said that on the river under the ice, he'd heard someone knocking politely, and he had wanted to answer because it felt rude not to. On my second night, the rules were easier to love. That doesn't mean they were easy. The beacon caught on itself once at the top of the hour, and I did not look and still saw something that wasn't mine in the reflection of the coffee in my cup. The AWAS added the tone, and I sat on my hands for a long time and spoke aloud through my counting numbers because it's made my breath do something useful. Freight 265 tried twice, all cheer and stopwatch exactness. Eli asked for Foxgate at 2:29 and then again at 2:31, like maybe I would forget which side of 30 was allowed and which side of 30 would oblige me to think about Nora and what she had called him when they fought about the coat. A child knocked and asked for water in a voice that had the wobble of a real throat's muscles, and I drank mine and went to the bathroom and let the water run a long time, and hated closing the door and closed it anyway. Added another addendum, useful inversion. Sometimes the kindest answer is no. This is not cruelty. It is pressure on a door that wants to learn where the hinges are. On my third night, the manager pulled me aside before she left and said in that cautious tone people use when they are thinking about liability, if you need to file a non-standard report, use Form 13B and put it in the green folder. We keep those downtown. Who reads them? I asked. She thought about lying, then didn't. No one, she said, until they have to. I read the older 13 billions in the green folder with a feeling like opening a mouth that is already full of something and finding your fingers there too. A report from 8 years ago in a shaky old hand said, heard my own name on frequency 3 times. It said, don't do the third time. A report from 20 years ago, typed on an actual typewriter, said, during slope one day of ice storm, saw a second beacon, lights, not ours. Do not answer. A report from last winter in neat block letters that were familiar said, there is a voice in the basement that has Rose's patience, but not her breath. Don't let it out. I had met Rose on the page. The night I met her voice was after a week of inlets and rules, when I was making coffee because the generator coughed and the taste of fuel had gotten into the water heater again and I needed hot to wash it out. The beacon had stalled only once. The lights had trembled. Marlowe sat and stared at the door with his tail making little left-right punctuation marks. I wedged it. I put my hand on the wood the way you put your hand on the hot hood of a car to see if the engine still remembers running. The wood was cool. The hinge made a sound like a hinge. The window in the old gift shop reflected me like it does, and like it always had, and like something else on top of me wears me for a second and goes, "Don't." A woman said on the other side of the door. The kind of don't you say to a friend. Wait. Her voice was gentler than the rules, less bone. I stood there with a wedge and a hand that wanted to do the wrong thing because it sounded like the right person. Sometimes the trick isn't that it mimics you badly. Sometimes the trick is that it knows who you're trying to be. Rose, I said, because who else would I say? The wedge creaked under a weight that was a notion with elbows. Marlowe thumped his tail once, and then again, and then stopped. And that was his pattern for yes. Because I had started to learn his language, the way you learn a place's, whether by naming it with your teeth. Don't, she said again, softer. Not you. I put my forehead against the door. I have a thick skull. I earned it. Write it down, I said, and the sound that followed was not a voice, but a movement away, like someone making space for someone else to sit at a crowded table in the log. I put basement voice, female, used my name. Closer approximation than previous, I added. Ask for countersign. But there wasn't a countersign in the book for Rose. There was only an index card tucked into the pocket at the back, a grocery list, maybe milk, coffee, flour, fix the light in gate 2. Don't answer after 1:13 if Dry Creek rattles. The card was old. Grease had made a see-through patch where someone with a mechanic's hands had touched it 100 times. Nothing on it said how to tell the difference between a friend and a voice shaped like one. Nights slid. The sky did its thing. Once in a while there were bands of green light that braided above the snow, and I stood on the tarmac and let them, and felt the hair lift on my arms and scalp. Sometimes the moon cut the world into pieces so hard you could take a knife to them and each would make a different sound when it hit the floor. Planes came and went. Men with faces like old books turned pages and climbed aboard and left. Women with coffee and lists held clipboards and spoke into the night, and the night answered politely, and sometimes there was a gap where the answer should be, and something else slid into it. I broke a rule one night. I broke it on purpose. That is the confession I owe that first line I wrote about the plane that never existed and my name being on the log. It was late January, a month after my first night. The AWAS had been normal for days. There was a storm to the west that was taking its time deciding whether to love us. The wind was light. The temperature was down in the -30s, where the sound of your breath is different, but you don't talk about it, because if you talk about it, it will notice. The fishermen had come by 2 weeks prior to leave a dozen donuts on the counter and nod at me like a person acknowledging a quiet religious debt. He didn't ask about the knock. I didn't tell him that I had dreamed since of children and doors and polite hands. The medevac call came at 2:09. A woman in labor in a cabin on the north side of the inlet. Obstructed, bleeding, leaving was the safest way. The ambulance got to us at 2:25, lights off. The medic had a face like my sister's boy when he's afraid and pretending to be angry. "They're 10 out, he said. "Please tell me the runway's good." "It's good," I said, and it was. It was crisp, like a new Bill Kulak radio. The medevac said in a voice so tired my eyes pricked because I wanted to tuck them under a blanket. Airlift 5-3, final 3-1, lights medium. Patient unstable. We need a quick load and go. Kulak copies, I said. And then the second voice, bright like new plastic, said Airlift 5-3, final 3-1, lights high. I did the pattern, 3-1-3, then a 2-count off, then on medium. Copy, the first voice said. The second said, open the gate, buddy. It had said buddy twice now. It had earned itself a closed door. I opened Polar for the ambulance. The wind shifted. Something in my throat hurt like I had swallowed a word wrong. The runway was a black river, Kulak, the right voice said. Patient's name is Elsa June. She's 20. She asked for her mom. We're going to try and land without touching the brakes. The wrong voice said, patient's name is August. He asked for water, and it was good. I felt the pull of it, even knowing it was wrong. I could watch myself wanting to throw the wedge in the trash. Like a person watching a dog run for a ball off a cliff, I had my hand on the runway panel, and then I took it off. I turned and I walked to the basement door, and I pulled the wedge out, and I put it in my pocket. I opened the basement door. The rules said wedge. The rules said do not. The addendum said invert. The voice said don't. I broke it. The stairs down were the kind of stairs you descend when you are a child and you don't want to. Softer than wood should be, old paint slick with oil from hands that touched it years ago. The air was warmer than it should have been. It smelled like something that was trying very hard to smell like nothing. I remember thinking, if I don't make a place for it, it will make one for itself. And what else is an airport but a place you make so that a thing can come in from a bad night and land at the bottom of the stairs? In the corner near the water shutoff, there was a patch of black that isn't a color you see often in the world. It had depth. It was the kind of black you see in pupils and wells. The concrete around it had a tar smear, like someone had tried to fix a roof leak in the floor. The patch moved, just a little, like a breath. Don't, the woman's voice said. It came from the patch or from the pipes. I couldn't tell. I know, I said. I know. And I reached down with both hands and pressed my palms to the concrete on either side of the black. The cold that met me was not weather. It didn't hurt the skin. It hurt the part of me that keeps a list of names. Please, the voice said. And it was not Rose's voice, or it was, and I did not look for a countersign. I pushed hard, like holding a door while a friend inside throws the lock. The first wheel touched the runway overhead. I could feel it in the bones of the building, a tremor. The second wheel touched and skipped and settled. Somewhere in the terminal, a cup fell. Somewhere outside, a breath fogged. Okay, I said. The black under my hands was a drunk taking your coat to feel it. A child asking for water. A lover asking which thing is the thing you will say yes to. It pushed. I pushed back. The concrete made a little sound, like a wink, like something sealing. The medevac rolled. The pilot laughed once, cracked, at the beauty of reverse. The voice in the basement said, I'll wait. And it was so patient, it almost killed me. I stood up. My legs shook. I wanted to throw up. I didn't. I climbed the stairs. I put the wedge back under the door. My hands left prints like heat for a long time, and then they didn't. We loaded a woman in a blue parka, with a face that made my heart hurt because it held pain and steel in equal parts. Her partner held her hand and said nothing, because there is nothing worth saying at that point that isn't a lie. The flight crew moved like they had been told the end of the world and decided to be precise anyway. The ambulance driver had tears in his beard where they had frozen and fallen. We closed the doors. The King Air bit the air and took her south. Later, when it was quiet again, I took the blue binder and wrote another addendum, same neat block letters I had used. Write down addresses in the dispatch center that last year when I had decided that if I heard the right scream one more time, I would chew my own tongue out. Sometimes you use your body like a wedge. I did not like writing it, but somewhere between 2:09 and 2:27, I had learned that the rules were not to keep a monster out. They were to keep me from being the kind of person who opens doors uninvited. You can be generous and still memorize the shape of a lock. February eased to March. The snow got harder on top and softer underneath, which is how your foot goes through and your ankle twists and you get mad at something that cannot hear you. The AWUS had a new hum once or twice, and I let it sing. Freight 265 tried on a Wednesday and on a Saturday, and then didn't bother again. Eli laughed on the radio at 2:31 exactly for a week, and then went quiet. I found one of his old gate keys in a drawer and put it in the blue binder like a saint's finger. Marlowe slept on the radiator and watched the basement door and pretended to ignore me. I pretended to ignore the way I sometimes caught my reflection in the gift shop glass and thought, a stranger who believes in rules, which is not the same as a believer in April. A job posting went up on the bulletin board. Ops, Agent I, Nights. My name was on the part that said trainer. I took the paper down and put it back up again, and then took it down, and then the manager put it back up when I went to pee because she thought it would give me the right kind of guilt. When the new guy came in, the one with a new beard and a laugh that could hold a room, I handed him the blue binder and watched his face as he flipped. At the first rule, he smiled. At the second, he smirked. At the fourth, he looked up and said, "Who is Eli?" At the 10th, he scratched Marlowe's head, and Marlowe allowed it the way an old king allows a parliament. "Just read it," I said. "And when you hear your own voice, don't answer. Count backward by sevens. It keeps your mouth busy." He nodded, like a person humoring a man with a superstition about the plow driver's ghost. The manager watched me from her office with a face I had not seen her use before. It was a face you use when you are looking at someone who is about to say something difficult but necessary. "Write your own rules when you need them," I said to the kid. "Don't get precious. Don't pretend they're universal, because they aren't. They're just the way we didn't die on a night when something wanted us to. You can add to that. You can subtract. That's the job." He looked surprised. He looked like he was going to say something like, "Isn't there a manual?" And then he didn't. He wrote his name in the front page, where we all do, the way a ship's crew might scratch their initials into a beam, because the sea likes to make claims and men answer back. On my way out that evening, I stood in the parking lot and looked at the beacon. It spun slow as ever. The air smelled like snow and diesel and ocean. I remembered a voice in the basement saying, "I'll wait." I believed it. I think it's still waiting. I think that's all it has. Waiting. And the trick is to not spend all your waiting on it. You give it a wedge, and it will want your bones. You give it a door, and it will want your town. You give it your name, and it will print a plane you didn't land. We talk about monsters and mean big teeth. We should talk about copies and rules and the way a person with a logbook and a set of keys can make a night either safe or something else. We should talk about the fact that I work the night shift at a remote airport in Alaska, and there are strange rules, but they are not any stranger than the ones that let a metal thing fall out of the sky and touch ground and bring with it a human who will live because of you. And you will live because you didn't open a door when a kind voice asked, sometimes when the wind frets at 1:13 and the gate rattles. I get up from my chair and walk the terminal and press my hand to the basement door and feel the wrong cold seep into the heel of my hand like ink from a broken pen. I say no, in the same tone I used to tell drunks to sleep it off, and I drink water from my thermos. And then I go back to the desk and I wait for the radio to cough me up a voice. When the printer stutters, I cross out movements that didn't happen and write down the ones that did and sign my name. If the echo asks a question, I don't answer it. If two medevacs call, I make a pattern with the lights like a prayer. If the poppy goes green, I touch my fingertips and count. You have to live in the rules you make. You have to learn when to invert. You have to decide when kindness is not mercy. You have to accept that some nights will want to see how much you can hold closed. There's a new name in the log now under mine, in the neat block letters of someone who has been exactly one night past a bad night. I look at it and I feel a shape in the bones of this place that will stand as long as we do. I look at the beacon and it tells time. I look at the runway lights and they show all the places a person can step that won't hurt them. I look at Marlowe and he looks at the door, and we don't open it. And when Freight 265 calls on a Friday, I say stand by, and then I don't say anything at all.